Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Ace That Interview, which is part of our Get That Job webinar series here at the Champaign Public Library. My name is Jordan Neal, and I am the career librarian here at the library, so thank you all for joining us. For the latest library news and updates, please visit our website, champaign.org, or you can follow us on social media. You can email us at librarian@champaign.org, or you could just chat with us just by visiting our homepage. The library is open and we are still offering our curbside services. So again, please just visit our website or give us a call for more information. Moving on to a couple of Zoom features available to you that might help during the webinar. There are some buttons or icons at the bottom of your Zoom screen, depending on your device. On the far left, you have the options that control your sound or your speaker. Moving to the right and within the center of the window includes a chat and raised hand option. You could use these options to ask us any questions or share any comments. Our presenter, I'm sure, will be happy to pause for any questions, but it might be easier to wait until the end because she might cover them during the presentation. So we invite you to type your question into the chat or raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd prefer to speak and ask your question. I would also like to remind everyone that our webinars are recorded, so please be mindful when you do share those comments and questions. Finally, I would like to introduce our presenter, Cindy Chestnut, who is a Director of Human Resources and Workforce Development. We have previously hosted Cindy in the past, and she's agreed to join us again. As usual, we have Cindy's entire bio available on our website, but she enjoys providing opportunities for individuals to grow and develop their potential. So with that, Cindy, thank you again for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds great. I am thrilled to be here and thank you everyone who's taken time out of their day to be part of this session. Let's go ahead and share some screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. This session is about focusing on the interview and acing that interview for the job that you desire. So before you leave, I have some goals and hopefully you will be able to walk away with some practical tips that you can put into place. First and foremost, wanting you to understand the importance of properly preparing for the interview. We'll be spending most of our time in that particular section. And also, getting the interview, it's important that you differentiate yourself from the other applicants. So we want to look at things you can do to differentiate yourself. Also avoiding those blunders that can help block you from getting the interview. And then finally, just briefly, we'll touch on successful virtual interview tips as well. So there's a logical order to what we will be covering, and we'll be going step by step through that process. So starting with the pre-interview prep, then there's the interview day, and then ultimately the post-interview follow-up. Okay. So let's start out. I like to really put a job in the context of a relationship. So when you are a job seeker, basically during the interview process, you are looking to form a relationship with an employer and employee relationship. And so it's important that you identify your needs and your wants, and then hopefully that employer can satisfy those needs and wants. So one thing I would caution individuals first and foremost is don't try to be something you're not, or or attempt to answer the questions as if the way you think the interviewer wants, because basically that ultimately most likely would turn into the recipe for a bad relationship. I think your job satisfaction is going to be best achieved when you know your strengths and passions and the things that you enjoy doing, and you can align your career and job choice with what comes naturally to you, because we all tend to enjoy doing things that we do well. Unfortunately, not everyone is in the position to do so. So if you're currently seeking employment and have the financial concerns in mind, go ahead and land that position. And I would encourage you to treat that role as a current job that you're providing an opportunity and doing development along the way to secure the next position that you would become available. And last thing I'd like to note on here is that not all interviewers are trained to interview. So depending on who you are and where you're seeking employment, the person may or may not be skilled. You're going to find that some interviewers enjoy doing all the talking and pretty much telling you what they're looking for. So that makes it very easy for you to say the things that they're looking to say. And so the goal for you in finding employment should really be finding a workplace where you can truly be your authentic self. So next, I'd like to talk a little bit about first impressions. And this is so important as psychology starts to tell us that I'm going to be mentioning it 2 separate times during the course of this presentation. But in the amount of time that it took you to read one of the first words on this slide, about 1/10 of a second, according to the Association of Psychology Science, that's how quickly our brains are going to work to make a first impression. So literally, first impressions are made in the blink of an eye. And so you can do those typical things, smile, get the haircut, wear the right clothes. Those are all things that are important, because that first impression is going to tell your interviewer, they're going to immediately form an opinion on whether they like you, trust you, whether you're safe, and also who you remind them of. So it's important to just know the nuances of the psychology around interviewing and the importance of making a first impression. So let's now dive into your opportunity to prepare for the interview. And once again, taking time to prepare and conduct research and formulate some interview questions is going to truly pay off on making that great first impression, as well as landing you that job offer. So today in our society, there's lots of information out there that you can gather to impress your interviewer, and thanks to the internet. So I would strongly encourage you, most employers these days have a website. So to go to the company website to find out more about the organization, as well as the interviewers. So typical interviewers for the job would be what we would call the hiring manager. That would be the boss of the position, as well as an HR representative. And so if you know the names of those individuals, you can always look on LinkedIn, for example, and see what you can find out about those individuals. And really, maybe the way the social media network operates, you could also discover if you know anybody that knows them, because it never hurts to know somebody when it comes to securing an interview and getting a job. So let's go back to the research. What you're going to be looking for on the website. So you're going to be looking at you know, what the employer has to offer that's going to satisfy your needs. You're also going to be able to find the organization's mission statement, and most organizations these days also have value statements. So, you know, you can look and see how closely your values align with the organizational values. So there's also another, you know, that's you researching the organization to find out more to land the job. But you can also, if you're not aware of, there's a site called Glassdoor. And through Glassdoor, you can find evaluations, comments from prior employees of that organization, as well as there's sometimes this salary information for various roles. And it's a great site for you to find out a little more about that organization as well. Any questions concerning research?
No questions at this time.
Okay, great. So we'll go ahead and move on. So this is where I consider the greatest, one of the greatest values in the preparation for a role. From an employer's perspective, the ideal candidate would have done all the things bullet pointed in the job announcement prior and have experience in the particular role that they're going for. However, we all know that that's not necessarily realistic on the part of an employer, and so they're looking for what we term the most qualified candidate. So what I like to do is set up a couple T-charts where you can assess your background and experience relative to the role, as well as assess the values of the organization and how well they align with your goals. So, to do this, we are going to be leveraging the job announcement if there's a position description available. So basically, I suggest you can note down the primary job responsibilities and the position description, and then do a comparison to see how many of those relate to the job at hand. So this will give you a very realistic overview of what you've done historically that can align for these roles. I'm also going to talk a little bit about, in this particular example, the individual has, bullet point 1, 4, and 5 directly matching experience, but 2 and 3 are lacking. Then you can go ahead and take a look at 2 and 3, and although you might not have the exact experience for those particular roles, you can identify things you've done in your past. And even if it's volunteer work, I can't emphasize enough, if you need to fill in education background and experience, that volunteer work is a great way to gain additional skill sets that you would be able to talk about in an interview. And so, for 2 and 3, you're going to figure out, what have I done to closely align? And, be honest, if you don't have experience in that area, you can state that during the interview. Just make sure to follow it with enthusiasm and a desire to want to learn that particular skill or trait, or how easily you've learned things in the past. The values, that's how the work gets done, and often relates to the culture of the organization. So I can't emphasize enough having the value alignment as part of your assessment of the role that's being presented. So next, in this next section, we're gonna roll into the evolution of a question. So this is gonna help you prepare for any questions that may be posed to you during the interview process. And I have to say, once again, based on the skill set of the interviewer, these questions are going to take on many forms. So what I'd like to do is prepare you for the types of questions that you would get with the most experienced interviewers, because if you prep at that level, anyone offering the questions at the lower level will be much easier to respond to. So I'd like to just show you an example here of the evolution of a question. And so most everyone, unless you're working 100% independent, they want to know that you get along well with others and that you're going to be a team player. So let's just take a look at how that question can take on various forms. In its simplest format, the interviewer would ask you, are you a team player? And that's what we call a leading question. And I think everyone on the call today would have the correct response to that question. And the correct response is, yes, of course, I'm a team player. Another type of question you can get would be the next one down. How would you handle working on a team? And so basically, you may have experiences working on the team, but with this level of question, you can go ahead and theoretically tell the individual how you believe you would handle working on the team, whether that is your experience or not. And then here's another leading question. Teamwork is very important around here. Are you a team player, aren't you? Once again, pretty easy to know that the proper response to that is yes. And then we get into what I would call the higher level questions. What are your work experiences working on the team? So this is where they're going to pretty much go to that checklist, and they've got their team needs and experiences, and you're going to share what you put on the other side of your preparation checklist. So the most complex question, and we're going to get into, is tell me about a time you worked on a team. So this is open-ended, and it's leaving room for what I would refer to as story time. So there's one technique out there, and if you want to show hands, how many of you have heard of behavioral-based interviewing? Okay, I see a hand raised. Great. So some of this, it will be repetitive perhaps for you, but hopefully you can build upon what you already know about behavioral-based interviewing during this segment. Or if not, it can at least serve as a good refresher. So I like to refer to it in its simplest terms as story time. And the premise behind behavioral-based interviewing is the best indicator of your future performance is your prior performance and work experiences. So in this type of interviewing, the skilled interviewer is wanting to know things that you've actually done. And then they can compare what you've actually done to the needs of the organization in the form of their job description in the open position. So there is what we call the STAR technique. And so utilizing the STAR technique, this acronym can help you put together some responses to what I would consider some of the most common interview questions. So STAR stands for, first of all, you're going to describe or put in context the situation or task that you were doing with your response. The heart of the STAR is the action that you chose to take in that particular situation. And then the R in the STAR has you closing with the results of your actions. And so the skilled interviewer is going to ask these open-ended behavioral-based questions and preparing a full STAR response is going to be a way to differentiate yourself from a majority of the applicants. So let's take a look at a couple examples, if we may. And oftentimes a behavioral-based question will start with the prefix, tell me about a time, or tell me about a situation. And then there's the follow-up. And one thing I can tell you about behavioral-based questions and behavioral-based examples is often you can get a variety of different questions, but the example of your experience and response could be adequate to respond to any of the questions. So with this particular example, tell me about a time you saw a problem and took action. Or tell me about a time you took action without being told to do so. Or tell me about a time you exhibited taking initiative. So those are three distinct questions. However, if you look at storytelling time, you can come up with one behavioral response that would be an appropriate response to any of the questions that I just shared with you. So let's take a look at this response, and not only take a look at it, but I want to break down for you the pieces of the STAR so that you're comfortable putting your own examples together. So in this particular circumstance, one day I was working on the line, I noticed the labels were going crooked on the bottle. Bottle's crooked. And so basically this is the context or the situation or task at hand. The next piece, I immediately called the line lead to shut down the line. Within 2 minutes, the line lead had shut down the line, and I made some adjustments to the labeler. So that middle section is the actions of the individual. So what did they do in this particular circumstance? They called for their line lead, and then when the line lead shut down the line, they made adjustments to the labeler. And then the final piece, we started the line back up 5 minutes later, and the problem was solved. So bottom, the R for results is really where you demonstrate that your particular behavioral example had a positive outcome. And a skilled interviewer, if you do not share the ultimate results, is going to ask you, so what was the result of that action? And it's only with that result that they can really get a true sense of the example and be able to evaluate it. So let's try another one. Tell me about a time you had to adjust quickly to change, or you went above and beyond what was expected, or you provided superior customer service. Once again, 3 different questions. However, we can utilize the same behavioral example to respond. So I'm going to just give you a minute to read this particular response versus reading it to you. Okay, so in this particular example, the situation isn't in the first sentence of the response. It talked the circumstances, the manager coming down at the end of the day and asking for help and responding to customers. The individual also went and added some additional context, their response versus the response of others. And the fact that they, the action is they often stay to, can be completed in a timely manner. So in this particular example, I wanted to point out, you know, the situation is there, the action is there, and we can draw our conclusion that it was positive, but the interviewer could ask, and so what was the result of that? And you would hope to hear the response that the customers were satisfied. And then last in this particular segment on the evolution of a question and preparing for behavioral-based questions, we'll go ahead and go back to the very beginning question. Tell me about a time you worked on a team. And let's take a look at a sample response for that. Okay, so in looking at this, I'm gonna see if we can't get some chat responses in. Are all, let's just get some feedback on what you think of this particular response. Does this have all parts of the star? Okay, thank you, Stacy. I see Stacy is looking in and thinks this is a good response, and it has all parts of the star. So let's go ahead and debrief on it. So the person was a member of the safety committee. And so that definitely is a situation, and working on the HAZCOM program is definitely part of the situation. And then I've got Patricia. So when it comes to the action, be more specific as to their role working as a member of the safety committee. And kudos, Patricia, exactly right. All pieces of the star are there, Stacy, so excellent job. However, they're referring to the team in this team response, and really a good interviewer is going to do some further probing questions, and they're going to be curious as to what the specific individual, or what did you do as a member of the team that brought about the positive results, with the plant manager being pleased and giving everyone the pizza. So excellent job. I think this is also a good spot to take a pause. If anyone has any questions, you can put them into the chat. Okay, if you do, just feel free to continue to put them in. I'm going to go ahead and continue on the preparation part. And so another piece is, you know, you're preparing for responding to questions, but also it is very, you know, there's certain common questions of, you know, tell me a little bit about yourself is a very common informal opener. And so, you know, preparing your response for that. And I would recommend that you really keep your personal situation in life out of that, and really focus it toward the job at hand. And I always prompt the Reader's Digest version, because candidates often can take that question and go into a rambling mode. And that blocks time for the interviewer to ask other relevant questions. So prepare for the tell me a bit more about yourself, remove your personal information, from that and keep it work related, and make sure it doesn't go beyond 1 or 2 minutes, so that they can get on with the rest of the interview questions that have been prepared. It's also really good to prepare why you're interested in this position. And right here, this can also be a differentiation between you and other applicants for the job. You know, if it aligns with your values, or you believe in the mission, or you've always wanted to do that type of work, and you can project that enthusiasm toward the position, that can go a long way for an employer and help differentiate you from the crowd. And then there's also the typical, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses questions. And those are very personal. One technique for answering the weakness question is you can identify something, for example, you know, I might not be, you know, accurate spelling has sometimes been a challenge. And so I'm very thankful that we now have spell check. And I am a prudent user of the spell check, and have been able to successfully overcome that particular situation. So that's just one technique you can use, and but give some thought to those, because they are extremely popular, regardless of the that question comes up whether you're experienced or not experienced as an interviewer toward the candidates. And then most interviews are going to end with do you have any questions for me? And so being prepared with your set of questions for the interviewer that would ask that. And here are just a few examples of things that you can ask. You know, expectations for the position. This is your chance to hear directly from them what the priorities on that job description might be, and you know, whether they align with the checklist that you created as part of your preparation. One of my favorite questions that I like to ask an individual is, what do they not want this position to be? And so I find out all kinds of insightful things, but once again, with the purpose of trying to match the candidate to the job. So I think these are straightforward here on the screen. And there's plenty of others that if you have genuine questions about what you've heard during the interview process, by asking questions specific to what you've heard in the process, just lets them know that you have been actively listening and have a genuine interest in the role. Okay, I told you I was going to circle back around to first impressions. Interview day is here, and here's why. So this is what the numbers say about first impressions. And so I already shared with you the 0.1 of a second for your brain to form its first impression, literally at the blink of an eye. But interesting that in this particular survey, 55% of the first impressions were based on your appearance. And so we're going to talk a little bit about showing up with the interview in a manner that will make a good first impression. And then finally, and this one I find very interesting, is that within the first 90 seconds of that interview, 33% of interviewers say they've already made a decision on whether they like the candidate or don't like the candidate for the role. So first impressions definitely count, especially if 33% of interviewers are kind of making up their mind which way they're going to go. And if it's favorable, then they're going to be looking for things that reinforce that. If it's a negative first impression, they'll probably be more focused on things that reinforce that. So let's talk about interview day. First of all, you want to make sure, I always recommend you dress to match the role. So if it's an office environment, professional job, you're going to want to dress professionally. If it's retail or manufacturing, for that type of role, you definitely want to dress well, but doesn't necessarily have to be the suit and tie that has been more traditional in the past. Another thing you can do as part of the interview is kind of take your cues from the interviewer themselves. Once again, they're all different personalities, all different experience levels when it comes to interviewing. And if you have someone who's more conversational, then you can kind of take on that role. But there's something psychologically about mimicking the style of the interviewer that is beneficial for an applicant that's trying to get a job. And I know interviews and for a job can be incredibly stressful for individuals, and they can be nervous, and a good interviewer is going to try to do things to help the candidate relax. But also remember that interviewers are people too. And the more relaxed you can be and comfortable in the conversation and the interview process, the better it will be for the overall impressions for the position. It's always great when an applicant projects confidence without projecting arrogance. I'll say that again, projecting confidence without arrogance. And just from a practical standpoint, making sure that you have copies of your resume with you in the event that interviewer does not have them available. And then please make sure you arrive on time. I have some colleagues that are under the impression, arriving on time is late. So it does not hurt to be 10 minutes early. However, I've also had other experiences where the applicant has arrived an hour or a half hour early, and really the chances are that the individual that's interviewing or human resources is not going to be prepared or ready, and that's not necessarily a positive to arrive that early for an interview. So I keep it early, between 10 to 15 minutes would be ideal. And I see Stacy would give us other examples of behavioral-based questions. We'll save that one for the end, Stacy, but absolutely. Any questions at this juncture? All right, this section, things to impress the interview. So basically all of these are intended to help you stand out compared to the other applicants. So doing these things could help result in the job offer. The only constant I think we've learned this year and really reinforced through this COVID is that the only constant is change. And so businesses are constantly changing and evolving, and to be successful, they need their workforce to also be willing to change and evolve in order to remain successful. So anyone that projects that they enjoy learning new things and being challenged, it is going to impress the interview. And if you can even have behavioral-based examples of learning new things and enjoying being challenged, that would be great. One of my behavioral-based questions was based on initiative in the earlier portion, and individuals that take initiative, they see things and that need to be done and they do them. That typically is appreciated by an employer and can help differentiate you. There's a lot of individuals that choose to wait to be told versus stepping up. So that's a great way. And then once again, relying on the actions and the results you've had, whether they directly align with the role you're applying for or not, they can demonstrate that you are action-oriented and not just all talk. A lot of employers these days are also focusing on not only the work that needs to be done, but building a positive culture and a workforce that is valued and respected. And so how you approach your work and a desire to make a workplace an even better place to work is going to differentiate you, because it addresses, for those employers that are focused on creating a positive culture, that hiring you is going to help when it comes to creating that positive culture. Helps and encourages others. That goes without saying. Who wouldn't want that as part of an attribute of someone that you're hiring? And then, as I emphasized earlier, change, evolve, improve are absolutely critical. Okay, now that we've talked about things you can do to differentiate yourself, let's go ahead and talk about some of the common blunders or things to avoid. And first of all, if you're an individual, you consider yourself the open book, there is such things as oversharing during an interview. One of the common things I get asked when consulting is, I have this trip planned and I'm going to need to take time off right away in the first month, and when do I share that? And my common response and recommendation is, during the interview process, your goal is to obtain an offer of employment. Once an employer has reached offer of employment status, they've identified you as the person they want. And then, this upcoming trip that you had planned can be a condition of employment, and you can work with them on those details post-offer. So really check yourself on sharing personal information during the course of the interview, your family status, what's happening personally in your life. The employer wants to know that you're going to be dependable and able to show up and do the job. And so avoid oversharing. Next thing is the use of filler words, the when you're talking and communicating. I think we all do that, including myself to a certain extent, but you want to make sure, if you're practicing out loud with someone, that it doesn't become a distractor, because you want the interviewer to be focusing on what you're saying, not listening and being distracted by the filler words. Which kind of leads me to the other one, the bullet point number 3 with the I's. And I have to tell you, I recently, the interview is about selling yourself to an organization, and you are wanting to talk about yourself. However, I had a recent interview where I had everything was I did this, I did that, to the point where it became a distractor. And so I ended up having a little tally sheet off to the side during the interview process where I was counting the I's. And believe it or not, this individual used I 119 times during the course of our interview. It was absolutely crazy. And so it's okay to use that we. You've got to also demonstrate, but share your details, but don't be so concerned that it gives the impression that you're only concerned about yourself. Late arrival is going to be a first impression. If they can't show up on time for the interview, are there going to be worries of them showing up on time for work? And then the lack of a smile or eye contact can also send a message that you're not interested or enthusiastic about the position. The eye contact thing, a trained and skilled interviewer is going to know that eye contact can also be a cultural thing. However, in American culture, going through an interview process, the ability to maintain eye contact sends the signal that you're trustworthy and you're listening and you're attentive. And obviously, smile addresses the friendliness and approachability. And then just, we're going to wrap things up here in a few minutes. Just a few things about the virtual interview. Some employers are continuing to do the virtual interviews as we're opening back up. But rehearsal on the camera prior to, so you get used to looking at yourself. That can be a major distractor during an interview if you're constantly having to look at who you are and what you're doing. So that practice can be incredibly helpful. And often there's also been situations where technology hasn't worked, and that can be extremely stressful for an applicant. And so knowing ahead of time a way to contact the organization or the HR person or the person that's interviewing you, if you have technology issues, is a great way to prevent some stress if technology isn't working. The neutral background is also key. And even though it's a virtual interview, I would strongly encourage you that go ahead and dress for the interview, at least from the waist up, right? What will be on the camera. And also, I read recently that standing up, so taking the interview in a standing position, just helps the diaphragm and the tone of voice to be reflected more positively. And last, post-interview is send the thank you note. This is another great way to differentiate yourself and help with the likelihood of getting that job offer. One caution with sending the thank you is make sure it's not some canned response. Make sure to personalize it. And if you're sending it to multiple individuals in the organization, you want to differentiate it for each of them. It's perfectly acceptable to send a thank you through human resources to pass along to the others, or also directly to the hiring manager if they provide their contact information for the hiring manager to pass along to the others. But you will definitely these days differentiate yourself if you send a thank you, and it once again demonstrates your genuine interest in the position. So with that, I am going to stop share and open it up for questions. And I see things have been coming in through the chat. Okay. If possible, conflicts with course college, something we should bring up at the interview or later. And I will not mention your name. That one's a little trickier because that has the potential of longer term duration. And so if they're looking for a regular full-time employee and they've shared with you the work hours, then it's going to be difficult for you to do the essential functions of the job if your course cuts into too much of the work hours that they've shared with you. So that's a situation where, yeah, you're probably going to have to disclose right up front, or ask the question about flexibility with work hours and see the response to that without being too specific. But the last thing you want is to, if they need a full-time person or they need a specific hours that conflict, that's more of a long-term arrangement. Another question through the chat, is it okay to email your thank you? And I would say yes. We have the technology today, and if you want to do the old school, handwrite the note, that's going to be appreciated as well. But email is, in my opinion, is perfectly acceptable for the thank you, and much easier for the interviewing group to share amongst one another. That's why I commented on not sending the exact same thing to each individual. All right, looking for other questions.
It looks like we have another question in the chat about applying if there are major things in the job description that you do not have. So for example, a certain degree.
Got it, yep. That is a very good question. If you're looking at a university environment, when they put those degree requirements in the position announcement, that is part of the checklist. They've got a rigid structure, and they're not going to consider you. More and more organizations, if they're serious about diversity, equity, and inclusion, are taking a look at the educational requirements and really posing the question, do you really need that degree or not? And maybe adjusting things accordingly. If it's outside of the, I would say either the government or the university type settings, then I'd say if you have everything in that job description except for the degree, it would not hurt to apply for that job. One thing I counsel people on regularly is, when you apply for a job, really it's all about who's in the applicant pool at that particular time. And so if you have done the things that need to be done without that degree, then and nobody else is qualified that's applied, then they could possibly look at that. That's a great question. But one thing I will note for the females in the audience, there have been studies that have shown that men are much more likely to apply for positions that they don't have any experience in than women. And women tend to want to be able to check every box in the job description to feel comfortable applying. So if you've got a large portion and you haven't done all the things on the job description, I would encourage not only the females, but everybody to go ahead and apply for that job, particularly if it genuinely interests you. Other questions? We have just a few more minutes left.
Thank you, Sydney. I was trying to go back and think of some of those behavioral questions that people are asking about. And a big one Cindy had mentioned, I just want to repeat, is tell us about a time that you had to be, flexible or adaptable. That's something I know I've received in a lot of interviews, especially with this current pandemic. So something else, I was trying to think of a couple others. How you tell us about a time you handled the challenging situation. Tell us about a time you may have disagreed with a supervisor or a colleague on a certain topic. Tell us about a time you had to be creative to solve a certain problem. So things like that, kind of the situational stuff, like the S and stuff.
Absolutely. And once again, you can almost anticipate the types of attributes or characteristics based on, that job announcement, right?
Yes.
And tell me about a time you made the project successfully. Tell me about a time the project didn't go according to plan. Tell me about a time you had to persist to get your desired outcome. The list can go on and on. And a skilled interviewer is going to target the job description and what's going to be successful for the role.
We do have a question here. Someone says, we won't mention any names, but they were let go after 6 years of dedicated service to their company. How do they address this in the interview?
That is an excellent question, and probably better suited for one-on-one with you, Jardine, but your former employer, in all likelihood, is going to verify employment only, and if they're a high caliber employer, and not be sharing personal circumstances. So, you can talk about from your perspective, your readiness to pursue other things. You want to be truthful first and foremost, but there are ways to word things to get around. The last thing you want to do is exhibit bitterness toward your prior employer. That would not fare well in the interview process. But I'm sure you have a perspective that is valuable that could be shared without exhibiting bitterness.
Yes, I agree with Cindy. It's very much dependent on the person's situation. So a lot of these types of questions we handle in the one-on-one appointments, because sometimes we address it even before the interview. Sometimes people find a way to mention things in the resume. So even if you were let go, what were you doing in the meantime? In addition to that, a lot of people have been doing a lot of training and courses during this whole pandemic at home. So there's ways we could address this even prior to the interview. But here at the library, we would sit down with you if you were willing to kind of work those out before and then prep for the interview. And that's something I want to mention to everyone is we do offer practice interviews here at the library where we thank you. Yeah, people are giving, first off, thank you, Cindy. I'm already getting into the details. Thank you. This was a great presentation, but since this is a set interview, we offer those practice interviews. I guess I should show my face, speaking of the virtual world, where we ask you, of course, we don't know this particular field or industry that you're in, but we ask you some of those general questions that a lot of employers ask. So tell me about yourself, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes it's me, sometimes I invite some of my colleagues to ask those questions just to kind of mimic that interview environment. And who knows, we might even have Cindy there. I don't know. Who knows what tomorrow will do for us, but we will offer those for you. You can do it through Zoom. We can do them in person here at the library, but we also give people the opportunity to record themselves so they can kind of see their mannerisms and their facial expressions. I know that has been helping me as I do webinars here at the library. So I won't take up everyone else's time. Once again, thank you, Cindy. That was a wonderful presentation. Here is my contact information if you wanted to follow up in any way. We also help with resumes and cover letters, and we meet with you one-on-one. Our next webinar will be Tuesday, August 11th at 2 p.m. We're going to be hosting Mike Furman from the University of Illinois, and it will be the art of negotiation, and talks about not just negotiating the salary, but other benefits that you could potentially discuss. You're not just limited to the money discussion. So he will be here next week. And then here's the remainder of our August workshops. We have a lot more still coming up in the fall, so please visit our website, champaign.org /events for more information. And then we have more workshops related to our business series, our technology series, our crafty adults, and our writers workshops. So we hope that you'll consider attending those webinars. And if you didn't catch my contact information, here is our librarian information. So if you email this address, it will get to me as well. I'm going to stop sharing. Well, once again, everyone, I know we're a little over time here. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoy your afternoon. And once again, thank you, Cindy, for your time.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.